Hi, everybody, and welcome. Thank you for joining us for today's Meet the Analyst webinar, Ad Measurement Trends, How Digitization and Privacy Are Driving Innovation. I'm your host, Max Willens. I'm a senior analyst at Insider Intelligence based in Philadelphia, and I am joined today by my colleague, also senior analyst, Evelyn Mitchell-Wolf, who joins us from Virginia. Hi, Evelyn.
Hey, Max. I'm pretty pumped to talk about measurement today.
Glad to hear it. Before we get into the main presentation, I would like to thank Attain for making today's webinar possible. And I'd also like to welcome Dan Kurter, who is the head of measurement and data strategy at Attain. Dan joins us from New York. Hi, Dan.
Hey, Max. Thanks for having me.
We are happy to have you. A couple things before we dive in here. Evelyn has a lot to get through, but there is no need for you to feverishly take notes or screenshot everything that she puts up on the screen, because a link with all the slides from her presentation, as well as a full recording of the presentation, will be sent to you after this concludes. But we do want you to participate. There is a chat window to the right of the video feed where you can ask questions, and you can ask as many as you like. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A portion of today's presentation. So that's enough out of me. Evelyn, let's get started.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Max. For the most part, we're going to go channel by channel here. We'll hit digital display. Then we'll spend a little time unpacking challenges specific to the retail media space. Then we'll talk about out-of-home digital audio, and then I will leave you with a few overarching takeaways. And just as a heads up, I'll be sprinkling in best practices as we go. Each channel is different, which means measurement in each channel is different. So we've tailored our suggestions accordingly. And like Max said, if any questions come up, please be sure to drop them in the chat and we will tackle as many as we can after we hear from Dan. Now, before we dive in, let's set the stage with some key themes that are defining the now and next of measurement. And these will crop up throughout the presentation. So first, of course, is privacy. This is manifested by regulators as well as by companies like Google and Apple that own browsers and operating systems. And privacy is reshaping ad infrastructures from start to finish, planning to measurement to optimization. And we've got a couple of big privacy milestones coming up that we'll discuss in a few minutes. Second is digitization of traditional channels. As tech evolves, so too does measurement. But at the same time, there are still pockets of traditional channels that are, well, traditional, and advertisers need to understand the performance of legacy media investments in the context of digital, and then vice versa. Finally, the maturation of new channels, namely retail media. All right, first up, we have digital display. This is the largest ad channel by dollar volume that we'll cover today. Advertisers will spend nearly $150 billion on digital display ads this year per our forecast. And they're about to have a messy breakup with third-party cookies when Google deprecates them in Chrome next year. And the industry's been in purgatory for a little while, and I'm going to take you on a trip down memory lane here. So back in 2020, Google announced that they would deprecate third-party cookies in Chrome by 2022. Now, keep in mind, Safari and Firefox had already bailed on third-party cookies by the end of 2020. So Chrome was and is the last major browser to support them by default. But Chrome is also the most popular browser by a pretty large margin, both in the US and globally, which explains why the deprecation of third-party cookies in Chrome has been treated by the industry as kind of a deadline to have suitable alternatives up and running. But by Q3 2021, Google had delayed cookie deprecation until late 2023, and then in Q3 2022, it announced another delay, this time until late 2024. Now, after more than 3 years of incubation, origin trials, and preliminary tests, Google's Privacy Sandbox APIs are available for all Chrome traffic. And starting in Q4, Chrome will start facilitating opt-in tests that simulate cookie deprecation. And then in Q1 2024, the cookie apocalypse officially begins. Chrome will deprecate third-party cookies for 1% of global users, and then the axe will fall in Q3. There's been a lot of skepticism that Google will stick to this timeline, and urgency has suffered as a result of these repeated delays. But it seems to me like we've passed a point of no return at this point. I think by this time next year, third-party cookies will be no more. And the only thing that could disrupt the momentum is if the UK Competition and Markets Authority declares Privacy Sandbox to be insufficient to support a diverse and competitive digital ad market. And Max, I hate to drag you in here, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts on whether you think this timeline is the timeline.
As amazed as it feels to say this, I think that you're right, that this is actually going to happen for real this time. I have vivid memories of working as a reporter back in 2020 and 2021 and talking to publishers about this. And there was a healthy chunk of them who would say, Google's not going to do this, or they don't have enough time to do this. And the reality is that thanks in large part to the Competition Markets Authority, there is a real kind of cost that will come if they don't hit this deadline, or if they kind of mess about with it at the last minute. And I think, to your point, really the only thing that could alter this timeline in a meaningful way would be the CMA coming back and saying, actually, this is not satisfactory. So I'm with you. As easy as it was to say that this is not actually going to happen, I think for real this is going to happen in about 13 months.
All right. So, barring intervention by regulatory bodies, the industry has about a year to get its act together for this new normal sans third-party cookies, according to me and Max. And a couple weeks ago, I logged on for work, opened Chrome to check my email, and got the Privacy Sandbox pop-up. It was pretty sobering, especially considering the consensus among the experts that I speak to for my research is that the industry isn't ready. Advertisers are clinging to cookies. I've even seen some data that suggests some sectors are spending substantially more on cookied inventory now than in the recent past. But while web advertisers are struggling to let go of cookies, mobile advertisers have already weathered a cataclysmic event. And in fact, the mobile ecosystem is in the eye of a privacy storm, if you will. As a not so reformed theater kid, I had to take this opportunity to quote Hamilton. If it hadn't been for Mr. Miranda, I don't know that I would have known about this particular meteorological phenomenon, but it is a perfect metaphor for what we're dealing with here. The first privacy change to make landfall in April 2021 was Apple's app tracking transparency policy, which required apps to obtain consent from users to track them. And mobile advertising isn't quite the same as it was pre-ATT, but the dust is settling. Social networks are beginning to recover from an abysmal few years, and mobile advertisers are adjusting their measurement strategies with updated tools and frameworks. The next wave of change will come when Google deprecates Google Ad IDs, or GAIDs. And that's one of a few key developments that will come into play in the next stage of adapting to signal loss. So if Google sticks to its original timeline of supporting GAIDs until at least February 2024, the industry could have a more concrete target deprecation date soon, or it should have a more concrete deprecation date soon. But whenever it happens, it's not likely to hit quite as hard as ATT did, because Google has been more collaborative in the development of its privacy-preserving ad targeting and measurement solutions than Apple was. So it's less of a surprise. In the meantime, speaking of Apple's privacy-preserving measurement solution, SKAd Network, or SCAN for short, will be getting an update in the near future. But adoption of the most recent version, SCAN 4, has lagged. SCAN 4 introduced several pivotal improvements over the previous version, including web-to-app conversion reporting, which is essential for measuring search performance. Even so, less than 1% of iOS installs were configured for SCAN 4 6 months after the update went live, according to data from Singular. And it's normal for absorption to take time, but the longer advertisers wait to upgrade, the longer they go without more granular insights on their mobile campaigns. Apple has also continued to introduce more privacy-preserving features. One of the big question marks since ATT went into effect has been enforcement. Apple has said that fingerprinting, which is the practice of using device-level data to kind of reverse engineer a user's identity, that's unacceptable. But it hasn't really been enforcing that policy. It does have a few things in the pipeline that will help on that front. A couple of notable ones, privacy manifests, which will increase transparency around apps' data collection practices by requiring app owners to compile a standardized file that summarizes what data they collect and why and who they share it with, etc. And then private relay, which will prevent the collection of IP addresses. So mobile advertisers don't have much time left in the eye of the privacy storm, but they are far more prepared for what comes next than web advertisers are, because cookieless solutions aren't ready for prime time yet. If you're paying attention, you've probably noticed that Unified ID 2.0, which has been stewarded by the Trade Desk, makes headlines regularly with a new partnership or adoption by another holding company. But UID 2 is not as prevalent as headlines would suggest. These are the identifiers that, according to Sincera, have the highest absorption rate. So of the instances where an identifier is attached to an impression when a publisher sends out a bid request, the absorption rate is how often that identifier actually gets picked up by the buy side. And Sincera updates this data regularly, but as of yesterday, UID 2 is only used a little bit over half the time that it's available. And this could be a good or a bad sign, depending on whether you're a glass half full or a glass half empty kind of person. But the value of each of these deterministic identifiers is tied to their scale. And it says something, I think, that UID 1, which gets nowhere near the amount of trade coverage as UID 2, has a significantly higher absorption rate. And if advertisers aren't targeting with UID 2, it's very unlikely that they are measuring with UID 2. Another sign that cookieless measurement solutions need to bake a little bit longer, if you'll forgive the pun, privacy sandbox tests have mostly revolved around targeting. And like I mentioned a few slides back, privacy sandbox APIs are out of origin trials and are generally available for testing. But there hasn't really been very much published about attribution reporting API test results, which is not a great sign considering Chrome's market share. Max, you cover the publisher side of the ecosystem pretty closely. Have you heard anything interesting about the attribution reporting API or any of the privacy sandbox protocols?
Honestly, no. And that is, as you say, rather worrisome, because if you've kept abreast of this over the last couple of years, you've known that publishers have been pretty hesitant to participate in this, and Google has really taken any opportunity it can to sort of demonstrate that progress is being made on this front. They published some results earlier this summer, again, not related to attribution, but just sort of to other privacy sandbox initiatives. And the results were, to my mind at least, really quite underwhelming, and the kind of thing that most companies would not put out into the wild if they weren't feeling some pressure to sort of keep participation and engagement with an initiative going. So the fact that no one that I speak to has heard a lot about the sort of progress or the promise of the attribution reporting APIs is, I think, cause for a little bit of concern.
I agree. Luckily, there are more solutions out there, and we can't talk about cookieless solutions without mentioning first-party data, which is undoubtedly a huge piece of the post-cookie puzzle. But it isn't enough on its own. There's just not enough scale. And that's a widely acknowledged shortcoming. And yet, according to DoubleVerify, advertisers think that activating their first-party data is the cookieless solution that holds the greatest promise. And it's the same among publishers. They think that activating their first-party data is the cookieless solution that holds the greatest promise. And there's no question, everyone should be building their first-party assets. However, a robust measurement strategy will match advertiser first-party assets with deterministic data graphs from publishers, and then fill in the gaps with probabilistic solutions and maybe consented third-party data. There will be a mosaic of solutions that have to work together in order to retain the same amount of functionality that advertisers are used to. So, what is an advertiser to do? What are some best practices here? First, don't wait to figure out your post-cookie measurement strategy. Not only will this set you up for success in the long term, but in the meantime, it could save you money. According to 33Across, costs were lower for non-cookied inventory in Q2 for the sectors highlighted here. And savings varied from quarter to quarter, but it's useful information when building a case to justify spending money to test cookieless identifiers. And second, future-proof with a privacy overhaul. Yes, strengthening your first-party data is a foregone conclusion, but consider whether your customers are freely giving their informed consent. And step into a skeptic's shoes here. Like, will the average person actually be able to interpret your privacy policy? Privacy-preserving tech is a must for measurement and targeting, but it's up to whoever is providing input data to keep that data compliant, and consent is a big part of that. Okay, retail media. Retail media is a part of digital display, but it's unique because over half of retail media ad dollars go to search formats, which aren't display, at least by our definition. And it is one of the fastest growing major ad channels that we track, which makes it especially interesting. So over the next few years, retail media ad spending will see double-digit annual growth rates. And in case you're curious, retail media is often cited alongside CTV as an ad spending growth driver. So here is CTV ad spending growth plotted alongside the retail media trend line. CTV will continue to grow rather healthily, but its growth rate will start to decline while retail media's will accelerate. But it's not all roses. Fragmentation among retail media networks is a major speed bump here. And advertisers are starting to curb their enthusiasm to some extent, given measurement challenges stemming from lack of methodological standards across platforms. Even something as simple as conversion windows can vary drastically from platform to platform. And as it stands, it's nearly impossible for advertisers to compare platforms against each other in fine detail, which can lead to misallocation of budgets. The Interactive Advertising Bureau and BWG Strategy recently surveyed retail media buyers about top challenges in the RMN ad ecosystem, and almost 2/3 consider the lack of measurement standards to be a major obstacle. Now, last week, the IAB and the Media Rating Council released guidelines for how to apply existing measurement standards to retail media. And those guidelines are open for public comment until next month, but it'll be a while before there's meaningful adoption. And in the meantime, the lack of standards won't keep advertisers from investing in RMNs at all. It'll just affect how quickly they grow their investments and with which platforms. And the question of which platform drives the best results for a particular business is a biggie. Incrementality is essential for lower funnel media. In many cases, consumers are searching a retailer site for a particular product, intending to make a purchase. So if an ad is served and the consumer clicks through, the retailer would be taking credit for a conversion that was going to happen anyways. And the retail media measurement equation isn't configured to account for this yet. And according to Sky and BWG Strategy, that's one of the leading challenges that could slow retail media ad spending growth. Max, you cover retail media networks for us. Can you add any additional color or spice here?
No, I mean, I think this is a great slide because it illustrates that there's sort of lots of things that are on brands' minds. To the point you made on your previous slide, I don't think any of these is keeping brands from opening their pocketbooks at all, but it is affecting how much money they pull out. But incrementality in particular is really important because an inability to sort of get past those questions can really hamper investment. I think a great example of this is a channel like affiliate marketing, which has been struggling to sort of get past incrementality questions for a very long time. And some brands and some networks have sort of made some headway, but it can be a very persistent problem. And so I think that the quicker that RMNs start trying to tackle it, the better it's going to be for their ecosystem as it grows.
Absolutely. So retailers, you have your call to action here. What do advertisers do? First, take advantage of new tools and solutions. The issues that Max and I just discussed aren't new in the retail media space. Advertisers have been making a lot of noise about them for a while, and agencies and ad tech vendors recognize the opportunity to demonstrate their value. And many have solutions in market to help alleviate some of these frustrations in lieu of standardization. So if one such solution is available to you, it's worth a try. Second, get in on the standardization conversation. Make your voice heard. These conversations won't bear fruit for a hot minute, but it's worth being a part of them, if only to stay up to date on how things are progressing. Okay. 2 more channels here. Out of home. These days, out of home measurement has become quite sophisticated. Gone are the days of using road traffic patterns and broad strokes foot traffic analysis to estimate impression volume months after a campaign ends. Innovation in out of home measurement has moved more quickly than some advertisers might think. It's driven by digitization. Digitization of the channel, yes, digital out-of-home will account for just under 1/3 of total out-of-home ad spending this year, but also digitization of advertising more broadly. Measurement is set up to ingest real-time data and provide real-time insights. In out-of-home, input data can be sourced from satellites, mobile devices, and audience graphs, and more, to count exposures with precision and accuracy. Now, out-of-home is a one-to-many medium, which does come with measurement challenges when advertisers are seeking a deterministic level of granularity. Connected TV advertisers know the drill. It's a similar kind of calculus to get person-level measurement from household-level data. It's challenging, but it's not impossible. So having effectively solved the exposure piece, out-of-home measurement has moved on to outcomes. Vendors can take the same data inputs used in other digital measurement frameworks, brand lift metrics, sales volume, what have you, to determine the effectiveness of an out-of-home placement or campaign. And connecting the dots between out-of-home exposure and a subsequent purchase isn't quite as straightforward as someone clicking through on a digital display ad. Again, similar to CTV, the screen where the ad is served is not the device that the consumer typically uses to make a purchase or somehow signal their intent to purchase. But CTV and out-of-home measurement vendors have developed techniques that give a very clear picture of performance. So what's next? Out-of-home is going programmatic. It's getting automated. Programmatic digital out-of-home market doubled in size last year after a long recovery from the pandemic. And growth is decelerating. You can see, and you can also see the recovery from the pandemic in this trend line. But by 2025, programmatic will account for almost 1/3 of digital out-of-home ad spending and about 1/10 of total out-of-home ad spending. So while technical standards have been developed to facilitate programmatic trading of out-of-home alongside other digital media, there still needs to be methodological standardization for omni-channel measurement in the programmatic space. So that's kind of a thing to keep an eye on down the line. So what is an advertiser to do with all of this information? First, challenge your out-of-home measurement providers to give you the same reporting that you'd expect from a digital partner. It is possible, and it's worth mentioning that out-of-home vendors are starting to get in on the data clean room trend, which will help integrate out-of-home into omni-channel measurement strategies. And second, don't take your eye off the privacy ball. Mobile data and specifically precise geolocation data that is tied to a specific individual is categorized as sensitive personal data under several state privacy laws. The upshot here is that using location data in out-of-home measurement or any measurement is unsustainable. Anonymized and aggregated location data may be a safer bet, but advertisers will need to adjust their expectations for reporting granularity regardless. All right, last but certainly not least, digital audio. A little bit of background here. Over 2/3 of the US population listens to digital audio, including podcasts, and the medium has shown remarkable staying power with consumers. On average, consumers will spend an hour and 22 minutes listening to digital audio this year, and that's more than 1 in 10 daily media minutes. And interestingly, it's the same amount of time that they'll be spending with social networks. But advertisers are only spending about 2% of their total media budgets on digital audio. That's nowhere near as much as they spend on social ads. And there are several reasons for this kind of discrepancy. One that comes to mind is attention. If consumers have some music on in the background, they're listening, but they're not really listening. They're not engaging the part of their brain that would boost ad recall, or that's the perception at least. And it really does come down to a perception problem here. Advertisers lack confidence in digital audio measurement, as demonstrated by this research from Nielsen. Podcast and digital audio measurement are at the bottom of the barrel in terms of confidence in ROI measurement. And the reality is that insufficient podcast measurement is stifling growth in digital audio ad spending. Streaming audio accounts for about 70% of digital audio ad spending, and it's relatively easy to measure ad exposures in streaming audio because the content is delivered in real time, often to an individual who's logged into a profile that they've curated to their individual music tastes. And then connecting an audio exposure to consumer behavior is trickier, but no more so than would be the case for the average TV streaming ad. Podcast advertising is another story entirely. It's exceedingly challenging to definitively measure exposures, much less outcomes. And that's because most podcast content is delivered via download. It's a technological holdover from when mobile data was a scarcer resource, and streaming an hour-long podcast on the go was prohibitively expensive for most consumers. These download-based delivery models make it really hard to know whether the listener listened to the whole podcast episode, whether they skipped through any ad pods. And the complexities here are compounded by the transition from primarily embedded ads to dynamic insertion. So, what is an advertiser to do? First, stay patient. The industry is working toward progress, and there are some attribution solutions that can give directional insights. They're not perfect, but podcasts are here to stay. They're a really important part of many consumers' media diets, and podcast advertising is a unique channel that's worth exploring if you're looking to add an intimate touch point along the consumer's journey. Second, consider video podcasts. Thanks in part to social video clips, video podcasts are becoming increasingly popular. In fact, YouTube is the top podcast platform according to some data from October, a survey conducted by Morning Consult. If measurement is holding you back from advertising on podcasts, video podcasts could be a great test and learn vehicle. All right, I'm going to leave you with a few overarching takeaways before we hear from Dan. So how can advertisers get the most out of their ad measurement? First, define and align on KPIs and goals. Do this before you approach partners, if possible. The first step to evaluating an investment in a platform, a channel, a data clean room, anything, is understanding what you want to get out of it. Remembering your North Star, be it sales, store visits, signups, whatever it is. Knowing what you want to measure and what you want to achieve from the get-go can help you streamline everything: communication with partners, decision-making, you name it. you can proactively mitigate friction this way. Second, be crystal clear on data assets and governance. Advertising is becoming a regulated industry where consumer data is concerned. And in some states, data can only be used for purposes explicit in your organization's privacy policy. And that's the bare minimum. So collaborate closely with your legal team to make sure your organization is in compliance wherever necessary. And finally, get involved in industry initiatives. We mentioned this before, but measurement is evolving, and the best way to stay ahead of the curve is to be a part of the conversations that are establishing the curve. So there you have it. That's it from me, Max. Back over to you.
That was fantastic, Evelyn. Thank you. Before we get to your questions live, and we've had some really good ones, and please keep them coming, I'd like to bring back Dan Kerter, who heads up measurement and data strategy at Attain. Hi again, Dan.
Hi, Max. Thanks again for having me.
So throughout Evelyn's presentation, there was a lot of talk about sort of future states, about Q3 2024 for the cookie deprecation, about the maybe further off future of a measurement standard across retail media networks. But when you think about a smart measurement strategy for marketers, what does it look like for right now as we all sort of wait for these new normals to take effect?
Yeah, it's a great question. In my opinion, the new normal is sort of already here. We know every dollar counts. We know every impression counts, so we need to measure it smartly. We have privacy safe data. And so the move towards that and first-party privacy safe data is the first step. And then from there, measurement strategy, aligning on KPIs, like Evelyn said, down to the sale, down to the actual verified transaction, understanding it in real time or in flight is a big enhancement that's been made recently. And then trying to get to full funnel. Evelyn talked about KPIs, defining your KPIs. Is it awareness? Is it upper funnel? Is it lower funnel? What's the KPI? But can you also get to a full funnel measurement strategy? That's what the future looks like.
I think that makes a lot of sense. How then, though, when we thinking back about the future states that we've been alluding to, how do you think marketers' data needs are going to change?
Yeah, we talked about it a lot today, but building first-party data strategies is super important. A lot of advertisers and marketers have already built first-party data strategies internally, but now it's time to work with partners that have first-party data as well. I see a world where there will be no third party going forward, no third-party data. So how do you work with partners that have first-party data? How do you bridge the gap to fundamentally understand consumers and their media investments? It's a first-party data strategy.
That makes a lot of sense. What do you think the measurement landscape looks like a year from now?
Yeah, Evelyn spent a lot of time talking about Google's timeline, cookie deprecation. We've all been waiting for it. You guys talked about the cookie apocalypse. It's coming. Max, you said you think it's coming like for real this time. We tend to agree. And so when it does happen, what does that look like? And it'll be the evolution towards a robust, future-proof data set, first-party data, panels with methodology to be able to surface the KPIs that we were talking about, and really having that trusted relationship from a brand to a data partner to the consumer, so that there's a trusted measurement currency down to the actual verified transaction. And we believe firmly in that. I think there is a world where, we sort of talk about this as like the scary new normal, right? There is a world where data and permission can live together with the KPI that we all care about at the end of the day, which is the actual sale.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Speaking of sales, I want to talk a little bit about retail media. It's something I think a lot about. I'm sure a lot of people on the call are intensely interested in it. Marketers have encountered their share of measurement challenges with RMN's rise. Evelyn mentioned standardization, difficulty assessing incrementality. What are the other challenges you've seen marketers face when it comes to RMN investment?
Yeah, I mean, definitely standardization. We hear that a lot. There's so much demand for incrementality. That's not new, right? But what's new, and I think evolving, Evelyn touched on this as well, is the need for marketers to understand incrementality holistically, especially within RMN. So to say, for example, that just seeing Walmart media drive Walmart sales isn't good enough, right? what's the effect on Target? What's the effect on other retailers? To have that robust view of your measurement, and robust view of your investment down to the measurement KPIs. So that's really important and challenges that we're hearing, and obviously there's going to be some evolution towards that. And then separately, I think, another challenge that we've really heard is finding data sources that can help with this, right? Privacy safe data sources that own the relationship with the consumer, not data aggregation or walled gardens, to be able to see that robust view.
That makes a lot of sense. So moving from one buzzy topic to another, how do you think AI changes measurement?
Yeah, so buzzy, right? And so, when we think about AI, right, like AI at its core is a predictive model, right? And so we've talked a ton about data today. For this model to be good, we need to have good data. And so it starts with good data, and then it also is privacy safe data, right? So if we're talking about sort of consented data feeding these models, then great. What's next? And I think that becomes really exciting. Right now, real-time outcome-based measurement sort of at the cutting edge. We've started to work internally on some predictive models that feed audience segments. The results are very promising there. And the next step beyond that is how do these models start to feed measurement? And can we get to a place where we're predicting measurement outcomes? That would be really interesting.
I like that a lot. This was great, Dan. Thank you very much. Now it's time to get to audience Q&A. Like I said, we got a lot of great ones. Thank you very much for them. We'll get to as many as we can before I get zapped by our producers. So first question, this one is for both Evelyn and Dan. Can you talk a little bit more about data clean rooms and how they factor into measurement? I feel like we've danced around them a little and we've talked a lot about first-party data, but what role do they play in this?
Absolutely. Data clean rooms have been around for a while, but over the last few years have gained momentum as data protection has become more of a business imperative. And it goes beyond compliance with privacy legislation. There's a layer of commercial interest at play as well. First-party consumer data has become extremely valuable. We've talked about it so many times so far today. We know its value, and companies need assurance that they have complete control over who has access to that valuable data. So clean rooms can help facilitate secure and privacy-compliant data collaboration, and they're quickly becoming table stakes in measurement, especially when it comes to cross-platform, cross-media, that kind of picture, because there's a lot of data sets from a lot of different players that need to come together to achieve that kind of picture. And data clean rooms are still pretty cumbersome right now to use. They're expensive. There's an interoperability issue that needs to be ironed out. So they're not a silver bullet solution in measurement by any stretch, but I would not expect them to fade away at this point. They are and will continue to be a critical tool in measurement. Do you have anything to add, Dan?
Yeah, I think that's well said. And I would just add, clean rooms are great. They're great as a first step for privacy. They're a great place to match privacy safe data where they're removing PII from the equation. At the end of the day, you still need consented and permission data coming in, because that is the genesis of a clean room, right? So
I have another one.
The old adage, garbage in, garbage out. It's like consent in and then privacy compliance out.
Doesn't roll off the tongue quite the same way, but
it doesn't. You're right.
It's definitely true. I have another one here. I think a bunch of people's eyebrows went up when we talked a little bit about third-party data and its role in the future of this whole ecosystem. What role is third-party data going to have? Is it just going to disappear? What do we think is going to happen there? Dan, what do you think about this?
Yeah, it's a really good question. It depends how we're defining third-party data here, but essentially what we're saying is that there needs to be a permissioned relationship with the consumer, right? So call it second party, maybe call it first party, but gone are the days of being able to buy data from a reseller who won't have consent to it in the first place, as this new legislation continues to take place and privacy becomes more at the forefront. So I do think you probably see third-party data sort of disappear or take on a different form.
Yeah, I was going to say the exact same thing. I think it's a terminology thing. The third-party data as we know it today probably won't pass privacy muster down the line. The bar is a lot higher now in terms of obtaining consent from consumers. It's all about consent, like you mentioned. And then, there being transparency about how and where and by whom that data can be used. So data will probably still be shared and used by parties that didn't collect that data. But that activity is just going to be more tightly regulated. And so there will have to be robust partnerships and contracts in place with very specific language according to legislation that will allow for those data pathways to continue to remain open. So it's a terminology shift, I think. The data itself might not change, but it won't be third-party data anymore. It'll be, at the very least, second-party data.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I feel like my next question has been sort of answered obliquely here, but I will ask it because a lot of people asked variations on it. Speaking about another mainstay of the kind of current targeting and data environment, what happens to retargeting when we move into this new environment? Does that just get nuked by privacy standards and the deprecation of third-party cookies? What do you think happens to retargeting in the environments we're all moving toward?
Well, I wouldn't say it gets nuked. It is going to be substantially more challenging, but there are solutions that are being tested right now. Privacy Sandbox has one retargeting solution. So folks are working on it, but the concern is very real because it does require a level of determinism that is getting harder and harder to make sure that those data dots are connecting across all those platforms, that everyone has the right permissions to be able to identify consumers. What browser they use will change what targeting method can be employed. So the concern is real, and I don't think it will go away, but I think it will get a lot harder. So strategies are going to have to adapt to maybe rely less on reaching the same consumer over and over again, and maybe driving them down the funnel with like progressive creative iterations. It's going to be a little bit more top heavy and nuanced with maybe some more audience segmentation rather than taking one particular person and then working that one person all the way down the funnel, if that makes sense.
Dan, anything to add there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is where like everything we've been talking about comes to fruition, right? Like you're talking about full funnel strategies. You're talking about like real-time measurement and optimizations to find the people who are converting on campaigns, or conquesting becomes more of a thing here because you're seeing down to the verified transaction. That's sort of how retargeting might morph in the absence of being able to track the cookie.
I like that a lot. I thought, a really interesting question. We've talked a lot about the sort of primacy of first-party data, not just now, but especially in the future. And one attendee of the webinar asks, what should smaller advertisers do that don't collect any data or have the capacity to do so? Where do those guys get left? Dan, I'll let you take this one first.
Yeah, I think we talked about, first-party data and panels, data sources that have the KPIs that they'd be looking for. And I think that's where the strategy goes.
Yeah, it's a tough position to be in because smaller advertisers, I mean, any sort of investment in first-party data or even like second-party partnerships that provide the same kind of data, those are expensive. And so I think what I've heard is already happening is a lot of smaller advertisers that don't feel like they have the bandwidth to really build out a robust strategy are also, unfortunately, depending on how they look at it, having to rely more heavily on walled garden environments that are super easy to set up campaigns and don't necessarily require teams and teams of people to monitor and that have very robust stores of first-party data with the consumers that are on the platform. So it depends. It's not unfortunate. It just depends on the way that you look at it, right? If a advertiser wants to build out that first-party data asset and doesn't feel like they have the resources, then that can feel constricting. Of course, these walled gardens do have a lot of data, so that's a positive there, I would say.
100%. I'm going to grab a question that I get to weigh in on, unless you guys make all my points for me first. One of our attendees asks, do you think offline retailers should partner with existing agencies or try to develop their own RMNs to benefit from the growing retail media market? Evelyn, what do you think? What's your read on this?
I think there's no harm in exploring partnerships generally, but I'm really curious to hear your thoughts on it because you are very close to the RMN space. So hit me with your great insights here, Max.
Well, now I feel very put on the spot. I mean, the way I look at this is I think that the role aggregators, things like CitrusAd, things like even something like, down the line, like a pack view are going to wind up playing a really, really outsized role as this market sort of stretches out onto the long tail. You think about not just the Amazons and the Walmarts of the world, but, your Wayfairs, your Krogers, your Home Depots, they all have the infrastructure and resources needed to, build the infrastructure needed to spin up their own RMNs. And they also, frankly, have the scale, not just digitally, but in person to sort of justify making that move and building something in-house. There is a long, long, long list of retailers that, is missing some combination of those things, or maybe even all of them, but they can still potentially wring some value out of this interest in RMNs. So I expect you'll see lots more smaller retailers try to find a way to get a little bit of incremental revenue out of this as investment continues to pile in. Do you have anything to add, Dan?
Yeah, I would just say that, that continues to contribute to the problem that we spoke about earlier, right? Which is,
100%.
Everyone will have their own walled garden. And that's great for the individual retailer, but for the brand trying to see holistic investment across, that's adding to the problem.
Yep. I think we have time for two more. I'd like to know what you guys sort of see. First-party data, has kind of been the unofficial star off stage of this show. The one attendee asks, what are some ways to use first-party data besides account-based marketing? I thought that was a really interesting question. Dan, what would you say? What are some other things that clients can do with the first-party data once they've gathered it?
Yeah, again, I think it depends how you're talking about first-party data. Is it internal first-party data that is owned by a brand, or are we talking about first-party data that's consented and permissioned by the consumer for the use of, for measurement across the ecosystem? And then, you can do a lot with it. You can do a lot of what we talked about today. We can get towards full funnel strategies. We can do things like conquesting audiences. You can start to have that first party and permission data in the advanced models for predictive. So it's just a culmination of everything that we spoke about today, in my opinion. It all starts with making sure we have the right data footprint.
Makes a lot of sense. And last one, what are some of the biggest mistakes that people make that might impact their ability to adapt to the new privacy landscape? What's something that people should stop doing right now to get ready for what's happening? I'll let our guest go first, and then Evelyn, you can have the last word.
Yeah, I think we talked about how the new normal is here. I think I see a lot of advertisers or brands or especially in the measurement space, dipping a toe in the water, right, with the new normal. And and not ripping the Band-Aid fully off. I think Evelyn touched on it earlier, still a heavy reliance on cookies and the old identifiers and things like that. How do we move past that, right? And it's it's human nature probably to wait for it to actually happen, but that's a mistake because we're going to be behind the 8 ball as an industry.
It is. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes. So I'll flip the question a little bit and talk about something that advertisers, like the first step that they should be doing. And I think I mentioned this as like a second takeaway up at the top, but future-proofing everything with a privacy overhaul, it should really be step one, like taking stock of all of your internal and external data flows, understanding where everything's going, what you have to offer, like what you can bring to the measurement table, and targeting all of these use cases, taking a really comprehensive audit of what you have at your disposal, and making sure that data is actually, that you can actually use that data for what you plan to use it for within the confines of any sort of privacy policy. That should be step one, because that will greatly enhance your efforts to understand, what kind of partnerships are available to you. If there is, maybe you should go seek someone or something else to build out what you have access to. Maybe you need to beef up your consent architecture. There's a lot of next steps that come from that can help make sure whatever efforts you put into your new normal strategy will make it through in the long term, that they won't end up having to be re-architected once again if something else changes down the line from legislation or even from operating systems and browsers.
We are going to have to leave it there. Thank you very much, Evelyn, for everything that you shared today. And very special thank you also to Dan for all the insight that you shared, into the team at Attain for the support. Our Studio II crew, the eMarketer production team, they deserve a huge thank you for making this webinar possible, for making us all look good and have this come off so easily. As promised, you will get an email with a link to today's slides, as well as a complete recording of the presentation. So keep an eye on your inbox for that. Before we wrap, a couple final things just to walk you through some of the things happening across eMarketer's media channels. We have a lot more upcoming live Analyst and Tech Talk webinars coming up. You can check those out at eMarketer.com/webinars. On the audio side, we do a couple podcasts that are excellent. Tune into Behind the Numbers, which is our daily podcast, anywhere you listen to podcasts. And please finally check out our newsletters. We publish newsletters on basically everything. We cover retail, we cover finance, as well as digital advertising. There is something for everyone. So if you haven't signed up, you can do so at eMarketer.com/newsletters. Thank you again for joining us, and enjoy the rest of your workday.